Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. It's good to see you all this morning. I want to just reiterate what an incredible opportunity this is and how glad that you all are here. What a great mix of people. We will have a resource out that lists the people who attended and participated in this meeting, along with expertise. But in order to be able to do that, we need for you to complete the surveys that Carrie has been sending around. So if you've received that from her, please do complete that. If you were not the person that registered yourself for the meeting, then it was sent to the person that did register you. So let us know and we'll make sure you get that survey so that we can share that information with you. I was looking at the registration information that I do have, and we have 26 states or territories represented here at this meeting, including the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We have DC here, Delaware, Illinois, Kentucky, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Maryland, Missouri, Mississippi, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, Arkansas, and California. We have 13 people here from Alabama, 17 people here from Florida, 62 people here from Georgia, 7 people here from North Carolina, 5 people here from South Carolina, and 13 are here representing Tennessee. It's a great group. And that's just who we have in our registration records. I'm sure it's even broader group than that. So I look forward to sending you the summary of who actually participated. I don't have that data with me right now. So I want to also recognize a resource that's available. It's a collaborative effort between the American Public Garden Association, the Association of Mexican Botanical Gardens, Botanic Gardens Conservation International, the Center for Plant Conservation, and the Plant Conservation Alliance. And this is at www.northamericanplants.org. It's a resource, the North American Botanic Garden Strategy for Plant Conservation, so it was something I wanted to bring to your attention. I also wanted to recognize Jay Staten and his contributions to this program by recording the sessions. They will be available afterwards. And as many presentations as possible, we will make them available to you afterwards. Then I have something else really exciting that I want to tell you. Vivian and Leo told me yesterday that the southeastern region of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will be adding a plant conservation page to the web page for the Fish and Wildlife Service. And that will be an incredible resource to us. That's an unexpected outcome of this meeting. So we're already just accomplishing so much, more than I even anticipated. So this is my sort of wonky model of what we're trying to accomplish. This idea of information gathering, which has been a part of the workshops leading up to this meeting here, and using that information not only for informed decisions, but also to set conservation priorities. And then circling back, creating a network, connecting, building this network, this plant conservation network, so that together, with our capacity and with resources, we can achieve conservation action. So yesterday during the capacity building session, we had expert presentations that outlined regulatory guidelines, policies, decision frameworks, resources for conservation, including swaps. We heard positive stories and examples that showed how demographic studies can help increase the success of restoration projects. We heard examples and best practices from groups that have been working on these types of projects for a long time, including the USDA Forest Service, the Center for Plant Conservation, North Carolina Botanic Garden, Georgia Plant Conservation Alliance, and Missouri Botanical Garden. And although all partners are willing to cooperate, we also heard examples of cooperative and uncooperative rare plants and the associated challenges and successes with restoring them. The presentations in the capacity building sessions were followed with valuable discussions on key topics that address ex situ and in situ conservation and restoration. At the same time, we had technical sessions going on, and the moderators did a fantastic job of moving these sessions forward and making them productive. They achieved more than we expected. They added information to the at-risk plant list, master list, and identified priority species, and this represents a lot of work. The priority species that were identified in those technical sessions, the core planning team worked with last night to format them and organize them for our sessions this afternoon. I also want to remind everyone that we're taking a realistic approach during this meeting. So we know that we won't be able to identify priority actions, priority recommendations for every species on the list coming from this meeting. But what we're doing is setting a process for setting priorities and identifying conservation needs, and that's what's important, and we're building a network. Last night also, we finalized a series of questions that we'll be using in the sessions this afternoon that look at management and protection for those list of priority plant species coming out of the technical sessions yesterday, ex situ and in situ safeguarding, information gaps, and research needs. So we'll be dividing into 3 groups this afternoon and looking at those priority species and using the guiding questions to capture as much information as possible, keeping in mind the things that we're going to be learning this morning about resources for conservation and excellent examples of conservation projects in the longleaf pine ecosystem. So, it is my pleasure actually to introduce 2 more people this morning to you. First, I want to introduce to you Chuck Hunter, who's the Chief of Division of Strategic and Resource Management with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Southeastern Region. Chuck Hunter.
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here and to some degree represent the National Wildlife Refuge System where the wild things are. When I say wild things, it's animals, plants, fishes, all critters, great and small. And so wanted to provide a little bit of background on how we arrived at this point. When we received the petition for over 400 species, plus we had a number of species that had already been identified as candidates. One of the processes we started developing was thinking about how can we group species into geographies and habitats to look at them as groups of species and not necessarily as one species at a time, but at the same time recognizing that our responsibilities under the Endangered Species Act required us to look at individual species as well. So as we were developing that idea, we were approached by the National Wildlife Refuge Association about, well, let's hold some workshops to actually discuss the potential role of management and conservation on national wildlife refuges around the Southeast. So it took a while to kind of figure out how that would actually work out, but our friends Dennis David and the folks at the National Wildlife Refuge Association really helped us put together a good process to visit where we thought there were quite a few at-risk species locally occurring in particular that overlapped where national wildlife refuges could play an important role in their conservation. And one of our thought strategies was if we already have federally listed species or other species of conservation concern that we're already managing for, how do these at-risk locally occurring species, regardless of whether they're eventually listed or not, fit into that picture? Are there things we need to be thinking differently about fire seasonality and frequency or water management, forest management, those sorts of things that would go beyond what we were already doing for our already list of priority species? Like a lot of agencies, federal, state, and otherwise, we're all seeing lots of budget cuts, and it's getting harder and harder to really do everything we need to do, so we really also need to make sure we're accomplishing priorities. And one of those priorities, we have several refuges that are pretty much tailored to plant protection. Lake Wales Ridge in Florida, Cabo Rojo and Laguna Cartagena in Puerto Rico. We just established a new refuge, Mountain Bogs, with a number of species that are either already listed or at risk. We have also representation here from mountain longleaf, where we're hoping to restore one of the formerly better populations of white fringeless orchid recently listed. So we got a ways to go here, and some hard work ahead of us. But these at-risk workshops, we were able to get some really good input, but it became pretty clear we really could do better on the plants. I mean, it was really good that we were covering a lot of the species groups with the people who we could get to come to the discussions. But at several of the workshops, we really just didn't do the job we needed to on the plants. When the second round opportunity came up, our friends of the Forest Service were interested in having their own round of at-risk species workshops. And as part of that discussion, it was realized, yeah, we need to do a better job with plants, but why not have a plant conference, a region-wide plant conference? And so with a combination of the National Wildlife Refuge Association, the Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Atlanta Botanical Gardens, that's what led to this being part of our second round of at-risk species workshops. So my thanks go out to all of them. The last comment I'd like to make is that in part of these workshops, at least from my perspective, not being a specialist on plants, I have a strong interest in biogeography, so I really appreciate Alan Weekly's comments yesterday. And linking, as I said, groups of species together that we need to be thinking about managing as best we can as a group, recognizing they all have different needs and different strengths and weaknesses with management programs. The Florida Panhandle workshop we had last December really brought home the relationships between a large number of plants, crayfish, amphibians, all associated with a combination of habitats from lake and pond shorelines to bogs, to savannas, to flatwoods. And it's really important to be thinking about fire in particular, seasonality and frequency, as well as water levels in combination. So there's a lot of strategies there that need to be kept in mind. One of the things I think most people here know, maybe not, the Atlanta Botanical Gardens is obviously great on plants, but they're also great on amphibians. They have a safeguarding activity going on here on a number of rare amphibians from around the world, but in particular, one species we're working on is a flatwoods salamander, two species, the frosted and the reticulated. And we just started with St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge, a program that includes Atlanta Botanical Gardens on trying to safeguard and rescue remaining populations of frosted flatwood salamander associated with longleaf flatwoods. So with that, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming. Look forward to the sessions this afternoon, and I'll just end with saying, go chlorophyll.
That was great. I also want to introduce to you Robert Trujillo, Director of Biological and Physical Resources Unit with the USDA Forest Service Southern Region.
So good morning, everybody. Welcome to Atlanta. You know, it warms me when I see a room of this many folks that are so concerned about conservation of biodiversity. And even so when it's about plant biodiversity, because I will be the first to admit that I suffer from animal blindness from time to time. And then I come to these kind of meetings or talk with my staff and I come back to the light. And so I say that to get at a point that a couple points that I want to share with you from yesterday morning that I've been thinking about. What a phenomenal talk that Alan delivered. You know, I wanted to sign up and track him down and see if he was accepting grad students. You know, made me want to go back to grad school. And so what Alan was really talking to us about these biogeographic signals that are there. You know, if we look at these relictual species, whether they're plants or animals, and how they've distributed and maintained themselves across the landscape, you know, this could be a roadmap to how we implement strategic conservation actions for this idea of these being waypoints or way stations for, you know, the future. And so I think if we take this information we're gathering at these at-risk species workshops, we listen to what the biogeography and the species are telling us. You know, we have a strategic action plan there for conservation. You know, get us away from some very important, you know, random acts of conservation, but maybe give us some more power. The other thought that I had from yesterday's talk was that, looking inside at my animal blindness was, plant conservation is foundational to biodiversity. You can't have none of the animal species out there without this herbaceous diversity, without the grass diversity. And in the Forest Service, we're pursuing longleaf restoration, shortleaf pine restoration, and we can get and achieve that composition of overstory, but without that diversity of understory, we still will have biodepleted landscapes. And so the work that you guys do day in and day out is tremendously important. I wanted to talk a little bit, the last point I wanted to make, and Alan hinted at this towards the end, was the idea of relevancy. So I got up this morning thinking about what am I going to come tell a group of close to 100 folks that are all more intelligent than I am about plant conservation. And so then I started looking around at the everyday things as I get ready and how plants impact each and every one of our lives. I think probably at least a half dozen species of some sort of plant product was used getting ready this morning. If we can somehow link bacon to plant conservation, then we'd be set. And so this relevancy of the work that we do for the conservation of plants and biodiversity to the conservation and the sustainability of our presence here on the planet is I think one that we need to make. The other relevancy, as Ellen hinted, is if you look across this room, we are missing a vast component of the folks that we serve, the folks that inhabit this planet, the folks that use our national forests, our national wildlife refuges. How do we move beyond our traditional model of raising awareness with these populations, with these underrepresented communities, and actually empower them to become active members of conservation? This is the challenge that I laid forth to my wildlife biologists last week in Birmingham, Alabama. My botanists were there as well. I thank you all for coming. We were in a windowless conference room, and so this is such a much better location. But that's the power, that's the challenge the conservation community has in front of us. The next great naturalists, of which I believe the ranks of the botanists and the vegecologists are our current, great naturalists of this time, are going to come from us empowering those folks to be active members of conservation. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Jenny, and Atlanta Botanical Gardens for hosting us, and I look forward to this morning's talks.
So we've started the morning strong with some really thoughtful ideas, some great ideas to be thinking about. So I'm really delighted to introduce Dr. Vivian Negrón-Ortiz to you. She is with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the Panama City Field Office. She has a Ph.D. in botany from Miami University of Ohio with a dissertation focused on the systematics and breeding systems of flowering plants in the Caribbean Basin and applications of this research to conservation. In addition, she has a master's in biology from the University of Puerto Rico with concentration of plant ecology. Currently, she has two hats. One, she is the botanist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Panama City Field Office and the Florida Recovery Coordinator for all listed species. She is responsible for endangered and threatened plant species recovery in Northwest Florida and portions of Alabama and Georgia, which involves surveying, implementing recovery actions, research related to recovery strategies and management, evaluating listed species classification, including status reviews, and preparing recovery plans. She identifies conservation opportunities for rare and imperiled plants and develops recovery action priority list. In addition, she coordinates and facilitates activities related to consultation and listing. Vivian, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Good morning, and thank you for your invitation and for creating this venue to talk about our imperiled plant species. As I research this topic, this is the first time that I'm going to talk about resources for plant conservation. I found many sites, but for plant conservation, it's very limited. There's a lot of tools out there for conservation, and it's limited, and as you know, in terms of funding. So in order for our conservation to be cost-effective and successful, we have to think in terms of where, how, and how much to invest, the tools to use, and the conservation programs to employ or to use in our project or conservation effort. So the talk today, I divided into 4 different topics. The first 3 topics are all integrated, and I will finish with some ongoing efforts that I call dreams. Okay, let's talk first about the definition of what is conservation. If you look in any dictionary, of course, conservation is an action of conserving something in particular, which means nothing to me. But if we look at the Endangered Species Act, we have a legal definition. And if you look at the first part of that definition is to use and the use of all methods and procedures. Right there means resources. And those resources needed in order to bring any TNE species, endangered or threatened species, to the point that protection is not longer needed under the Endangered Species Act. So these are just, in terms of resources, these are just a few tools. So we think in terms of materials, staff, knowledge of awareness, action strategy, supply of money. But the first question is, do we have enough of those resources? Think about that. And those resources are needed in order to produce a benefit, meeting needs, function effectively and efficiently. And that means our conservation program. So let's look at this nationwide, our problem. Jenny brought this map yesterday regarding our U.S. Fish and Wildlife regions. We have 8 regions, and number 9 is the headquarters. And these represent the Southeast, which represented for 10 states, including some territory, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. The symbols represent the highest number of those regions contained in the number of federal listed species, including also plants. Based on Nature Serve, we have about 19,000 plant native to United States. In the Southeast, of those native nationwide, we have about 45% in the Southeast. Protected under the Act, we have only 2%. But if we increase that number with all the imperiled plant species identified recently, that percentage will increase to 3.2. So think about the magnitude of our problems and challenges here. Nationwide, this table shows the number of federal listed species per group and per region. As of July 2016, we have listed 1,486 species. Of those, 59% are plants. And if you look at each region, in almost every region, listed plants are more or higher than any other taxonomic group. First, Region 1 is have the highest number of listed plant species, followed by Region 8, which is California and Nevada. Number 3 is Region 4, with 162. Moving to the Southeast. Okay, we have, as of July 2016, a total of 368 listed species. Of those, 44 represent plants. Where are they located? 33% are found in national wildlife refuges. And this is important to think about later on for certain number of initiatives. 70% are found in conservation lands, and 83% are found in private lands. In terms of the status of those species, 79% have an endangered status. Only 21% is a threatened status. Think about this, and this is important. because our effort and our literature suggests that our effort goes to threatened species. So we are just working with just a few percentage of all the listed plant species. So imperilment is very high, and the knowledge gap is very high in terms of endangered status of our species. Let's look at the magnitude of the threats here. Of those 162 species, 30% have a high, 30% have a high threats. About 63% have a moderate threat, and only 7% have a low threat. Now, this is important to understand because our efforts are concentrated, and this is based on literature, concentrated in species with high threats. In terms of recovery potential, and recovery potential means that the knowledge or understanding of the biology, and ecological factors as well as management needs, we have about 42% of our species, we have a good understanding of those needs and perhaps have a high recovery potential. So based on literature, the literature suggests that our efforts are concentrated in species with high recovery potential and high threats. Putting these together, only 34% of those species are found in those two categories. So our concentration are going in those only few species. Okay. Now let's move into what is our imperiled species. And we identify close to 279 Southeast imperiled plant species. Of those, 162 already are listed. And just to give you an idea, the magnitude of the where these species are located, we can say that 67% of these species that are not listed yet are found in more than one state or territory. This means that we have a potential for collaboration, but also means that the resources needed in order to recover and to protect these species is very high. So we have a magnitude, a problem here, and a lot of needs. So when we think about imperiled species, we have several elements to include. We have to mitigate threats. We have to think about the species and the target of the species and where do we know enough of the biology of the species. And we have to think in terms of locations and habitat. Each of one of these elements needs or require resources for any project, and the outcome is recovery. And recovery for us means mitigating threats and stop or arrest the declining of the species. So think about this in terms of our conservation effort and your conservation efforts in order to achieve our outcome, which is recovery. On average, and this is based on literature, it takes about 34 to 36 years in order to recover a species, a listed species. But we have a few tools, and this is what I'm going to concentrate the rest of my talk. We have a few tools in terms of information, policy, project management, decision making. We have a few tools about funding. I want to bring this, and so there's several information out there, several strategies that shows that we have to conserve biodiversity. And all these strategies, and there's some more, even including our U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service strategy for plant conservation proposed in 2014, show the same goal, protecting biodiversity. Memorandums of understanding nationwide, I'm going to provide just only two examples here, outline specific roles and responsibilities for our partners. And in 2014, 10 agencies signed a memorandum of understanding to address conservation needs for native plants and their habitats. What is the update right now? I don't know, but it would be good to see what is happening right now. In the military installation, we also have an MOU included 3 agencies, and plants are included here, and these are tied with 7A1 and 7A2. Okay, moving into information. I search and Google all kinds of different sites in the internet. I spend hours. This is the only one site that suggests that we can use freely all these databases, journals, botanical gardens, information organization, institute discussions, and they call it a bibliography. I found it very useful, and if you're not if you have not seen this site, I encourage you to explore this site. It's been the only one. If you have another information I would like to see, but this is the only site that put all together all these information about plant conservation in just only one site. We had to think for the Southeast in terms of biodiversity. Yale University, there was 2 years ago, there was a meeting, and a couple of graduate students assessed several sites, and they put together the 20 top sites that deals with biodiversity. I explored some of those sites, and I thought they are quite useful for our purposes. So I encourage you to look at those sites and see what can we do, what kind of information we can get, as well as what kind of management and decision-making information we can use from this. We all know these sites. As plant conservationists, I use this site continuously. The red list, Nature Surf Explorer, plant databases, Center for Plant Conservation, the Plant Conservation Alliance, and you name it. So I'm not going into details about this, but these are good sources of information and decision making. Another site that I found very useful is from Nature Conservancy, is the Conservation Gateway. Specifically, there's about 30 plus tools to develop, manage, and analyze, and use freely. I have to say that some of those sites are not working at the moment, but if you have plants that are found in the coast, I continuously use 2 of those sites, which is the Climate Wizard as well as the Coastal Resilience, and those sites are useful for determining the impact and of flooding for some of my plants. Decision-making tool. I want to bring this. This is the Landscape Conservation Cooperative. I'm not going into details about this, but it's a consortium of partnership, and they provide scientific and technical support for landscape scale conservation, support conservation planning, providing decision support tools to prioritize habitats, coordinate research, and designing inventory and monitoring programs. I found this very useful eventually for habitat corridor and land acquisition. This decision-making tool is very important for us. However, plants are not included in most of these LCCs. For the south, there's about 6 now, and only the southeast Atlantic, the South Atlantic include plants. So I would like to encourage you to be part of this effort in order to include our plants, because this could be a great tool eventually for land acquisition, decision making, and also there's funding attached to this source. As a few weeks ago, I was able to get a blueprint. It's a consensus map, and it shows exactly that integrates all the blueprints from the South, and it shows the priorities for conservation and restoration. And if you can look at your area, but sorry about this. If I look at Florida, even though in Florida plants are not included, I was surprised to see that some of those priority areas are also priority areas for plants. So I will encourage you to be part of this effort. And basically what I understand is that they're looking for people to provide information about plants as well as guide them in terms of species distribution modeling for the plants and other species. Now let's move on into the Endangered Species Program. And our mission is working to conserve and restore species and the ecosystem upon which they depend and prevent species decline. And we want to accelerate recovery for T&E species. We have several tools. I'm just going to present just a few of those tools. We have Section 6, which is cooperation with the state. We have Section 7, and those are Section 7A1 and Section 7A2. Is there, and that is consultation, is our species are in conflict with development, and it will be impacted by this development, whether federal or private land, they have to consult with us. Then we have candidates for listing and at-risk species, and we have two tools, the Candidate Conservation Agreements and the Candidate Conservation Agreement with Assurances. Let's start with Section 6. And the definition of the Section 6 is the Secretary authorized to enter in cooperative agreement with the state to establish and maintain adequate and active programs in order to conserve our T&E species. So basically, the state has the authority to conserve resident species, provide acceptable conservation program for our federal listed species, authority to conduct investigation, authority to establish programs for resident species, including habitat acquisition, and provision for public participation in designation of resident species as endangered or threatened. I'm not going into details about this because Mike Harris is going to expand this tool and the knowledge of this tool. But I want to bring this map. And this map shows our region 4, 10 states and 2 territories. Yes means we have Section 6 for plants and represent plants are excluded. So we have, according to this map and according to the information provided by Kelly Bibb, 4 states, including plants for Section 6 and 2 territories, including plants. These agreements are completely different from each other, and each agreement has to be evaluated every year. The question is, how can we expand Section 6? And I will ask Harry this question later. Section 7A1. Okay, so Section 7A1, remember, is for federal listed species. This is just at the stage of exploration right now. There's no Section 7A1 for plants, but there's several examples for animals. So what is Section 7A1? All federal agencies, in consultation with and the assistance with the Secretary, utilize their authority to carry out programs for conservation of endangered species and threatened species. And this can be very proactive. Appears to be that it's quite useful at the moment. We don't have example for plants, but Scott Wiggers is going to talk about this later. although we don't have example, we have informal cooperation with, for instance, the U.S. Forest Service and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And we have quite a few examples throughout the Southeast. I'm going to bring only one example from Puerto Rico, and this is just an MOU with the Army and the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Puerto Rico Department of Natural Resources. There are 3 signing agencies, and with this MOU, they are committed to protect and maintain the integrity of their natural resources for each of those agencies meeting their mission, as well as providing some recovery actions, and specifically for plants, surveying, collecting seeds, support, monitor annual reports and data. This is important. This potential could be 7A1, but it's not. It's an MOU. Omar Monsegun is here if you want to ask some more details about this. Moving to candidates for listing and at-risk species. 2 examples here. Let's see what is the definition of a CCA, which is a formal voluntary agreement between Fish and Wildlife and one or more partners to address conservation needs for a species that is not listed yet, and it has to be they have to commit to implement recovery actions, so listing may not be necessary. The other one, which is a CCA, which is Candidate Conservation Agreement with Assurances, is provide incentive money to non-federal property and in order to voluntarily conserve activities that help make listing species unnecessary. I'm going to provide just a quick example here for CCA. This is just a great example for the Georgia aster. It was candidate in 1999, petition again in 2003. And when Mara Alexander came aboard in Fish and Wildlife Service, she decided to put together and use this tool for this species. And there's about 9 signing partners, and they are committed to with a suite of conservation measures to help protect Georgia aster, and this species has not been listed. These also prevent regulatory constraints and also carry the missions of each of the partners. I spoke with Mara, and Mara said that this tool has been very successful, and every year they meet, sometimes face-to-face or just by phone, and everyone provide their input of what they're doing, and updating each one of their protection as well as conservation measures carry on. Okay, let's move on. We have a plan, but we need to stay focused. We have to manage information. We have to track progress. How are we going to do this? How are we going to track changes? How can we decide, okay, these are the results are positive, this is not working for us? We have several tools right there. For Fish and Wildlife Service, we have Threatened and Endangered Species System, for list and status recovery plans, Section 7 activities, and so on. We have a recovery online activity reporting for just only the recovery plans and track implementation of all our actions. For refugees, we have the planning and review, inventory, and monitoring activities. Region 4 have at-risk species finder, but it's just basically species name, status, taxon, and state range. We have the Griffin Group's collaboration platforms, and I just wanted to bring something outside also from Fish and Wildlife Service, is the Florida Natural Areas Inventory, and it's a big database for all our plants as also animals. But my question is, do we need a database to track our progress? Now that we have, if we put together a plan here, do we need a database to track that progress? I will let you know, or you let me know at the end of the talk. Okay, moving on. The role of education as a tool. And think about this in terms of resources, investment, money, and time. The goal here is to mentor students and interns, right? To help achieve recovery. That's our number one goal. And develop the next generation of conservationists. In this way, we tell them, or we show them what we do, the careers opportunity in conservation, and also we promote diversity. I'm going to provide you a couple of examples. In our office, we have an active program, and we have a student internship summer, and we started in 2014. We have brought already 6 students, and each summer we bring 2. This is just the first 2 from Miami University of Ohio. We have a cooperative agreement with the university. And they assisted us while they were in this internship for 10 weeks in projects such as writing a biological opinion, as drafting a 5-year status review. We invest time, but at the same time, they help us achieve recovery. They took Alexa and Jason, they took a project with them. We provided the initial data, and the recovery actions that they developed was amazing. They developed a species distribution model for these threatened species that if we get to find more sites away from the coast, we potentially delete the species. So they took that to the university. They spent 2 years developing this model, and as of May, I got my species distribution model here. Oops. So now I had to put together a plan, look for sites, and validate this. And this eventually will tell me whether I could delete the species in the near future. Resources here, the funding was very minimal. Each individual student, the cost was between $9,000 to $11,000. Materials, data, we provided the data. Software, we provide some software, but at the same time, the university provided some software. Knowledge, time, staff time, you have to spend time if you want to get a product from this. The time is Fish and Wildlife Service as well, university. But this is a great resource in order to achieve conservation and at the same time teach the next generation of conservationists. We have another initiative. We have initiative in U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and this is to increase diversity in our agency. And the priority Fish and Wildlife Service provided fellowship nationwide, and basically was in biological science and natural resource management or related field. This is more structure. It's about 11 weeks for a summer project, and it has to represent 1 or 2 recovery actions that lead perhaps to potentially the lease or prevent extinction. Important for this is that the positions can lead to to be part of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Shanice was my student in 2015, and during the summer, she worked in a recovery action for rhododendron, an endangered of species, and she discerned based on morphology the taxonomy of 2 varieties, and you can see here based on only the morphology that the 2 varieties are completely different. Okay, I have done this recovery action, and I can move on to another recovery action. So resources here, funding, okay, Fish and Wildlife Service provided funds for this. But we had to have the knowledge in order to move forward with this effort, because it's quickly very structured, and every single week they have to have a plan, the materials and time. Time investment is very high. And let's move on to the last part of the talk, resources in terms of funding. As you all know, budgets are limited, and in at least for Fish and Wildlife Service, it goes to salaries and all the predetermined priorities. So in order to facilitate recovery, we have to work with others. That's what we hear. And you have seen this previously. These figures show the spending for recovery of federal listed species. The first one shows the number of listed species in 2011. As you can see, plants represent the most listed species compared to the other taxonomic groups. And the recovery expenditure spending for each of these individual taxonomic groups, as for plants, is very limited. About 4% of the recovery expenditure goes only to plants. What can we do? Can we talk about solutions? You know, we have a very limited funding, and as I research this topic, budget and funding is basically the most limited resources in order to conduct our projects as well as any other conservation projects. I'm going to pose some questions, and I hope that eventually we can have a discussion about this. Can we continue our earmark spending on a few charismatic species? Controversial species, those that are in conflict with development, you know, raise awareness very high. The media is with those, and our funding goes to those species. Should we continue major spending to those species? Or can we engage other agencies to formally collaborate and contribute resources to us? Can we assign a budget for those controversial species? Can we reestablish recovery budget and prioritize annually and rotate the number of species that facilitate this facilitate budget and conservation for these, specifically for the endangered, for the species with endangered status. Looking outside Fish and Wildlife Service in terms of grants, I would suggest to this group to compile a list of general grants and funding information for collaborative projects. Two examples that came to my mind, and two examples that I've been looking for several times right now. First, let's look at this conservation fund. Several years ago, it was not as, what I want to say is that it is very difficult right now to get funding from this conservation fund because the species has to be tied to the IUCN red list, and to support projects based on plants, animals, and fungus species, and it's very competitive right now. Another source of funding is the Toyota Together Green, and there are three initiatives here within this big initiative, and plants are included. There's several projects already undergoing, including plants, and some of them represent T&E species. So let's compile a list. I have already put a list of potential grants, specifically not to target species, but to target the habitat. We talk about LCCs, and these are initiatives. Now, let's move on into what is to capitalize on existing initiative. Okay. You have seen this, right? The national strategy to promote the health of honeybees and other pollinators. The goals, there's three goals here. Reduce honeybee colony losses, increase the monarch butterfly numbers, and number three, restore and enhance millions of acres of land for pollinators. Where are the plants? Okay, what I want to bring here is that there's a lot of money here, there's a lot of investment here, and that there's several agencies in part of this initiative. Can we tweak this initiative so we can include our species. For instance, we have Rhododendron chapmanii. Bumblebees are pollinated, and this bumblebee is not unique for this species, but it goes all the way from Canada all the way to Florida. Potentially, we can assess the importance of this plant for this initiative. And if someone here would like to provide a way to tackle this problem, I would like to hear this. We have Fish and Wildlife Service a cooperative recovery initiative, and basically is to complete restoration and management action for listed species. We provide about $4 to $5 million every year. There are 6 programs involved, including the Endangered Species Program and the National Wildlife Refuges and so on. And there's 2 filters for this. In order to get funding, the plants or the species categories, they have to be in the preventing extinction category or showing success. And the species have to be found on and around refuges. And remember, our plant species, 33% of the species of the listed plant species are found on and around refuges. In Florida, 44% of our species are found in refuges. Only 5 are in the category of preventing extinction and showing success, and about 2 of them meet both criteria. So to get funding for this, even though it is so important to get funding for our plants, it's a little bit difficult. But when it happens, it shows great success, and I have 2 examples here. And this is Dale Sweeter. He's here, and he can provide more details about this, but this is for Amaranthus pumilus, and it's a federal threatened species endemic to the Atlantic coast from South Carolina to Massachusetts. And basically, the initiative was to prevent extinction. That's the first phase. And the main goal is potentially to the list. There's the initiative or the project involved 2 regions, Region 4 and 5, 6 refuges, and more than $200,000 for 5 years. The stage right now is they have collected seeds from near populations, and they're growing in a botanical garden. So they are in the initiative states of this project. Another example, again from Puerto Rico, is for Eugenia woodwariana, listed in 1994, 45 individuals. In 1998, 150 plants left before 2015, 2,000 individuals, but between 2015 and 2016, a new population was found. And using this funding, because it occurred near a refuge, they were able to put together perhaps a series of conservation actions that perhaps leads to eventually reclassify the species from endangered to threatened. So when these initiatives are working, this is a good way to achieve our mission. But however, the number of our listed species within the refuges are very few. And I want to finish this talk with an effort, as an ongoing effort, that when we cannot find funding for our listed plant species, then we work with partners to improve funding opportunities. And we started this project in September of 2015. We have 11 partners at the moment, Fish and Wildlife Service, and including the state and nonprofit organizations, as well as botanical gardens and universities. And our efforts is for all Florida imperiled plant species, and that represents more than 500 plants. And we have a vision, a mission statement, and we have several goals. And the mission for this endowment is to prevent extinction and to promote recovery of Florida's most imperiled plant species and their habitat. The mission statement is we want to provide a stable and consistent funding mechanism to support research, protection, and conservation. Three of the 5 goals is to provide long-term reliable support for projects, support target projects related to recovery, and collaborate with other organizations with objectives similar to those of the endowment, and to assist the protection of diversity in Florida. This is a great effort, and this is just the initial steps for this. But in order to put together an effort like this, there's some considerations to think about. We have to have a commitment for the conservation specialist. Definitely, that is very important. We have to have lead roles that guide the effort and the activity toward completion. We need a facilitator, coordinator, and implementer who can be able to write and edit the documents. We need to have a team leader. If we have a commitment with this, then eventually we can have a success story. We have to have legal considerations, because endowments are regulated. How are you going to approach donors? That is the big question. How can we approach them? We have also there's an annual edit for for the endowments. Thing to consider is that perhaps while we get enough funding, we have to consider becomes an organization first and apply to become a nonprofit organization. And that's where we stage at the moment. We are trying to put together a proposal and ask interested institution to host our endowment. And then we decided who will potentially could be our host institution. We need policies, and we need policies, organization policies, conflict of interest policies, administration policies, board of director policies, so you name it. This has been a great effort, a lot to think about it, and has taken me into different directions. One of the questions that we have is donors. Selling factors to endowment donors. Why is so important? To reach out to different audiences. Success story. We cannot sell this endowment saying, we have a lot of imperiled plant species that will not sell this. But we have to show what can we do if we have this amount of money. At the moment, we have put together a framework of the endowment, and we have a temporary board. And within the next few weeks, we will be able to send our template in terms of putting together a proposal for other institutions that will be hosting our endowment. Okay, moving to the last part of my talk. What are the greatest challenges? And this is just a modified versions of an article from Bioscience in 2012. Decision makers are not informed about botanical issues. So how can that influence resources? Publics lack appreciation for plants, and that is across. Failure to educate non-majors to engage in lifelong appreciation for biology and plants. Quantity and quality of jobs for trained biologists and botanists. We don't advocate for science. Decrease in science coverage in popular media. Lack of funding for research, protection, and conservation. That is the last one, but it should be the top one. So how can we deal with this? What can we do to influence reform? We need to keep educating students, the public, the scientists, and decision makers of the essential nature of plants. And we have to come across this message that plants are essential to our lives, wildlife and climate, and to the Future Initiative research in the United States. I have a long list to acknowledge. A lot of these examples and beautiful pictures come from my partners and colleagues from the Southeast. A lot of people here heard my talk several times and provided comments to my talk, and I want to also include Jenny, Mike, and Carrie for discussions about this talk. Thank you.